Hello and good evening. This is Peter Duveen here for Civil Defense, a series of short programs devoted to helping citizens by providing them with more information about the effects of an atomic explosion and what that might mean if there were some kind of exchange of atomic weapons between two major atomic weapon holding nations. And so we've been on this pursuit for about a month. We have about 30 programs. I've decided to shorten the programs so they would be more accessible to different people. We've been reading from different source material, sometimes from newspapers, more often from a book called The Effects of the Atomic Bomb, which was written in a revised form in 1950 and issued by the United States government in conjunction with Los Alamos National Laboratory. So, we are continuing these programs, especially because apparently there's a great deal of friction between the United States, NATO, and Russia, many members of NATO hold atomic weapons. The United States certainly does, and Russia certainly does. So friction between or among any of these nations would be a cause of concern. These weapons are operable, they can be launched, they can be detonated, and they can affect large portions of populations of various countries. Of course, our first concern is the United States itself. Not that we lack concern about other countries, of course we do, but we have to deal with the local situation here in the event that there is a nuclear exchange and nuclear weapons are used to demolish areas near where we live. So I have been reading recently about basically the effects of these weapons on health, radiation effects, in fact, more long-term radiation effects as a result of a direct bombing in which people are exposed to the intense radiation of the bomb, or even later effects from fallout from a bomb, where you have a lot of radioactive materials that continue to emit radioactive rays and or particles. So that's what we're dealing with now, how it affects the blood, different symptomatic effects, blistering of the skin, for example, was one, effects on the bone marrow, which can be extremely damaging to the production of blood cells, the effect on the lymphatic system, which has a lot to do with the production of white blood cells. And so all of these different matters relate to radiation in this case. Of course, there are other effects of an atomic bomb, but radiation is one that is singled out as a peculiar effect of the atomic bomb compared to conventional weapons, such as nitroglycerin or whatever you may use to blow something up. Okay, I'm going to continue reading from this section, and I hope you can follow along. I won't read a lot, and we'll try and read it slowly so everybody can listen and hear it. The lymphocytes of the blood have been found to be sensitive to internal radiation. Internal radiation in this case is radiation that results from, say, ingesting some radiation or ingesting some radioactive material or inhaling it. It's radiation that is emitted from some site in the human body, whereas external radiation is something that comes from outside the human body. So let me continue. let me read that again. The lymphocytes of the blood have been found to be sensitive to internal radiation, as also are the early red cells, erythroblasts. Almost invariably, the deposition of any radioelement in bone results in damage to the blood-forming tissue, with a consequent reduction in the constituent cells of the blood. The most sensitive indication of acute or near-acute effects of a fission product, irrespective of whether it is localized in bone or generally distributed, is the reduction in the number of lymphocytes. So in other words, if you inhale this stuff, say the fallout from a bomb, or inhale it or ingest it, it tends to deposit itself in particular organs, depending on the element or the compound that you have inhaled. So in some cases, it deposits in the bone, such as strontium or cesium. Different elements have an affinity to bones. They end up going where the calcium goes, and so that can have a bad effect on the blood, since it is the bone marrow that produces the red blood cells. One of the earliest systemic effects of a relatively large dose of internal radiation would be a reduction in the number of white and red blood cells. This would be associated with extreme weakness and anemia. Malignant growths may subsequently develop in those regions where the radioactive material has concentrated. It may be mentioned that no form of internal radiation illness has been observed as a result of an atomic explosion. Let me read that again, I'm sorry. It may be mentioned that no form of internal radiation illness has been observed as a result of an atomic explosion. The effects described above have been derived from animal experiments. Very interesting. So it looks like the bomb in Hiroshima did not necessarily produce this type of effect. At least by 1950, it had not been observed. But animal experiments actually found these deleterious effects, such as the development of malignancies and problems with the blood. It goes on. Plutonium compounds tend to concentrate in the liver and spleen, and also on certain surfaces of bone, particularly the peritoneum, the endosteum, and the coverings of the trabeculae of the bones. Figure 1190. Let's see if we can look at that. Figure 1190. Boy. Oops. Here we go. Figure 1190. Let's see what it says. It kind of shows where some of this stuff concentrates, but once again, we're dealing in the bones of rodents, which is of course not irrelevant to the human condition, but it is not quite the same either. So there we have the bone and where different elements congregate. Strontium and barium. It's the radioactive isotopes of these elements that are significant. Basically that diagram says where things will concentrate if they are ingested or inhaled. In spite of their short range, the continued action of the alpha particles due to the long biological half-life of plutonium causes severe damage to tissues such as the marrow and the spleen, where various blood cells are formed. So those alpha particles suddenly come into the picture when we're talking about internal radiation, whereas they seem to have been totally filtered out by the atmosphere or by any obstacle if the alpha particles are formed by external radiation. What's interesting is that these alpha particles are heavier. They are composed of 2 neutrons and 2 protons, and that's much, much, much heavier by thousands of times than the electron. But they suddenly become a factor when radioactive material is ingested. For normal peacetime working conditions, the permissible quantity of plutonium which may be fixed in the body is taken to be the extremely small amount of 0.5 microgram. In other words, 5/10 millionths of a gram for an average adult. That's the permissible quantity, meaning that's what a human being should be able to tolerate. This figure undoubtedly represents a very conservative estimate and involves a large factor of safety. As a result of long experience with radium, which is an alpha emitter, the maximum weight of this element that can be safely held in the body is well known, and purely on the basis of the rate of energy absorption from the alpha particles, the corresponding quantity of plutonium would be 5 micrograms. The presence of 40 micrograms in the body would be dangerous, and 100 micrograms might be fatal. However, as has been stated earlier in this book, it is only under certain unexpected conditions that plutonium is likely to constitute an important hazard following an atomic bomb explosion. In most cases, the danger due to this element can be ignored compared with that due to fission products for a period of at least 2 months in any event. By this time, it may be presumed that an inhabited locality will have been largely decontaminated. Uranium-235 has a much longer half-life than plutonium, and so a given weight of the former expels alpha particles at a much slower rate than an equal weight of the latter. For this reason, and also because it does not tend to concentrate in the body, uranium does not need to be considered a radiological hazard. And listen to that. A lot of times you're going to hear, well, uranium is bad, it's awful, it's going to have a bad radiation effect. This is actually saying not necessarily. So when you hear this kind of sensational dialogue about radioactivity and its harmful effects, it's something you ought to look into a little bit more before you sign on to it. The devil is in the details, how it could affect you or how it would not affect you. Okay. Although uranium is also a chemical poison, and yes, it is, certain compounds of uranium are poisonous, although the metal itself may not be. It is highly improbable that sufficient amounts could be absorbed in the body following an atomic explosion to have any toxic effects. So I'm going to leave it at that. We're already late. Sorry to take up more time than I really wanted to, but I'm going to end it here. I will be on tomorrow night, and you're going to have to catch this as a podcast until I can get back on live, and I will let you know when that is as soon as I can. So thank you very much. This is Peter Devine signing off. It is April 3rd, signing off April 3rd, 2022 for Civil Defense. Thank you.